default, but they're actually non-insect arthropods. They don't have 6 legs, as you can see here. And you can find them on elms, on willows, like I said, on poison ivy, oak, and sumac. Those are very closely related species. And summer is the season to go looking for them. So I wouldn't suggest going and picking a ton of poison ivy galls, but you can definitely go look for them. They are very easy to find right now. All right, now to my favorite part of this presentation. Wasp galls. Wasp galls are one of the most interesting and diverse groups of galls, and I'm going to be going into individual species, and so these aren't labeled, but just check out the variety of structures that these wasps can form on these plants. All of them have specific functions, and I'll be going into those as well. Let's see. Let's get started. All right, quick summary. If I say cynipids later in this presentation, it's because we usually call this type of wasps here cynipids after their family, Cynipidae. 41 genera, over 1,000 species worldwide. It's a very diverse family of wasps. We've got at least 66 species of these wasps here in Florida, and I say at least because the last official count was back in 2004. And that doesn't seem too long for a lot of us, but that was 16 years ago. So if we could get someone else to do a recount, I would absolutely love it. And I have a feeling we would have more than 66 species here in Florida. These guys parasitize oak trees most often. And Florida has 26 species of oak trees. And so there's lots of opportunity for these wasps to speciate, to diversify. But you will see some on roses, on blackberries, and on smilax. Not as common, but definitely there. They've got an interesting life cycle, 2 generations a year, usually. Sometimes certain species will have a generation that will take up to 3 years to develop, and then they'll switch back to a shorter generation. But we're still working a lot of that out. We don't know a ton about the life cycles for most of these species. One that we do know, this is one of the few that we know both generations of, is Dishelcaspis quercus virens. Try saying that 5 times fast, of course. If you don't know, cyclical hold on, dry mouth. All right. Cyclical parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis is pretty much just cloning. It's when the egg does not need fertilization with a sperm cell to produce an offspring. With almost every gall wasp, we think that they have a cycle like this, where they have an asexual female that induces a certain type of gall, and that produces a sexual female and a sexual male, and then they produce another type of gall, and the cycle starts all over again. Some of them are even more complicated, and we're still figuring it out, but I think this is probably one of the best descriptions we have so far. And so you see here, the asexual female, she's nice and big, because she's going to have all of the material to make her eggs herself. She produces this very, very small gall in the summertime. It's about the size of a grain of rice, hidden in the bud tissue of her host tree, a live oak or a smaller. And I'm talking 2 or 3 millimeters at the biggest. Sexual females and sexual males. The males are the smallest of the 3. They produce these bullet type galls here in the winter on the same host plant, luckily. And those are very hard, very dense and corky. It's very difficult for predators to get into those. And that produces the asexual female in the winter. And so the cycle just keeps on going. Hopefully in the future we get more and more people to help us figure out exactly how all of these species reproduce, but this is a pretty good blueprint for what we think most of them do. Let's get into a couple of the common species you'll see if you're out on the trails here in Florida. You'll see most of these galls out in dry habitats, scrub, sandhill, scrubby flatwoods, pinelands especially, but you want to look at the oak trees. This is a pretty cool one, Amphibolops murata. You can see over here this very interesting structure inside of the gall, this web-like uh, 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 scaffolding that is actually holding the kernel where the gall wasp is actually developing right in the center. This is actually to make it harder for predators to make it to the kernel in the center and to get to the developing larvae. If you see them green like this, then they're still developing, but once you see them brown, they're pretty much done. If you don't see an exit hole, then the larvae is likely still inside. But it can vary depending on if it's been parasitized by something else, and I'll get into that more later. But you'll see these guys on red oaks, so myrtles, scrub oaks, laurel oaks, and blue jacks. Androcus quercus foliatus, one of my personal favorites. It's pretty showy. You find it on the terminal buds of the live oak and sand live oak. The species name, Quercus foliatus, actually translates to leafy oak gall. And you can see that it's got these rosettes of leaf-like or petal-like growths. And that is because this wasp actually redirects the growth for the flowers of the tree. And so it doesn't have to create its own genetic instructions for the tree. It just has to redirect it. And so all of these rosettes that would initially have been part of the flower are actually part of the protective structure that wards off predators from the developing larvae. And you can see an asexual female here. If you catch them right around February, March, you might be able to pull some of the rosettes off and find a asexual female ready to go. Really, really cool species here. Another Androcus species, this one is Quercus lanigera. These are adorable little fuzzy galls that have the kernel where the larvae are developing covered in this fur. And the fur is probably just for deterring predators again, but I am curious if there might be a heat reduction purpose to those hairs, an insulating purpose, but that's just a guess. You find those on live oaks and sand live oaks as well. I think this is my last Androcus species, but this is Quercus petiolicola. And so these develop on the petioles of several different oak species, as you can see. These are very hard, tough galls. It's very difficult for predators to get in there, and they'll stick on the tree for a while. So you might be able to find these if you go hiking. I find them especially on Chapman's oak. Here is Balaenochnema quercus virens, one of the most common galls that I see, sometimes called a pea gall. These are actually very, very delicate little galls. They'll crush in your fingers quite easily. And so they're pretty vulnerable to predators, but they make up for that in numbers. Sometimes you'll find a young live oak tree or sand live oak totally covered in these galls, and it is quite impressive that the trees can withstand that kind of parasitic attack, because these galls are parasitic, as most galls are. But I've never seen a tree die or become seriously hindered because of these galls, and so it's pretty interesting how they can put up with that. But you can definitely see some pretty intense numbers with this species. This is Dichelcaspis quercus virens again, the one of the few species that we know the full life cycle to. Just showing you again the disparity between the sexual generation in the summer, very small, only as big as a rice grain, and the asexual generation, about the size of a penny, usually. Very hard, very corky. And so this generation definitely tries to hide more than anything, while this generation is tough and it's just hard for the predators to get into. Related to that is Dishelcaspis quercus omnivora, a pretty showy, pretty impressive gall that you'll find on Chapman's oak, especially down in scrubby areas. These are really, really hard galls. I mean, you pick them and you try to crush them, and it's literally impossible. There's usually only one wasp in each of these galls, but they're quite large, up to a quarter size in diameter. They are actually really, really pretty when they're fresh, but once they get a little older, they'll lose a lot of their color. But their main defense from predators is definitely density and difficulty in getting inside to the larvae, just with how hard this gall is. Dishelcaspis spongiosa has got to be one of my favorites. Such a fascinating gall. Very light, very corky and spongy. You almost don't realize it's a gall as soon as you pick it up. You can see the kernels. I've chipped away some of the tissue outside the gall. You see the kernels where the larvae develop in here. So there's multiple kernels per gall. It's called polythalamus, as opposed to having only one kernel per gall, which is monothalamus. This was only about a 12-inch tall tree. And this was the whole tree that I took, and I had a permit for it. But you can see how big this gall can get for just a very small tree. I took it back to the lab where I had a really nice camera set up. And here you can even see the developing asexual female inside. She's about ready to go, but it was just an awesome cross-section of that protective gall tissue. It's relying more on volume than on density. But there it is, protecting her from the elements and from predators, and doing a pretty good job of it. I have only seen this on Chapman's oak, but the literature says you can find it on these species as well. If anybody sees it on these species, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. All right, this is one of the more difficult ones to identify, Caloritis quercus batatoides. It's very similar to a species called Eumeria floridana. The only real difference in these species is which oaks that they parasitize. And that's true for several other species of galls. So if you're going to go out gall hunting, definitely try to learn your oaks, because it will help you identify a lot of your gall species that you find. Both of these species develop in the actual twigs of the tree. They don't have to change the growth structure all that much. They basically just make it swell up and fill with nice, tasty, moist tissue for the larvae to eat. And then they pop out, leave these nice discernible exit holes. And the Caloritis quercus batatoides prefers white oaks, while Eumeria floridana prefers red oaks. So at least if you know your white oaks from your red oaks, you might be able to get the species of gall. Ooh, this is one of the prettiest that we've got, Trigonaspis pallida. If there's anybody out there familiar with gall species, this species name just recently changed, so you might know it as something else. Some people call it an oak apple gall. I usually find it on Chapman's oak, but it does occur on post oak. And these are actually quite papery galls as well, so they are depending more on puffing themselves up as much as they can and getting the gall wall as far from the developing larvae as possible to make it harder for predators to get in there, as opposed to making it just very hard and dense and making it difficult that way. All right, and these are my last two species of wasp galls to go over, and they're quite difficult to discern unless you know your oak species. So this is another time when you definitely want to know your oaks. We have Neuroterus quercus minutissimus over here, loving the live oaks, the dwarf live, the sand live, and the regular live. Generally, brown, generally smaller than Neuroterus quercus over here, but it can be quite hard to tell the difference when all three of these are young. Quercus prefers white oaks, the actual species white oak, swamp, Chapman's, post oak, sand post oak. I could think that they could switch over species a little bit, but usually they don't do that. And so as long as you know your oak species a little bit, you'll probably be able to get this right. And I think these are actually adorable little things. Some people call them urchin galls, which I think is pretty appropriate. Now I've been talking about predators a lot, so let's actually go over what predates, what eats these gall wasps. First of all, inquilines. That's a word that we don't see very often, but it basically means a hitchhiker. These bugs will hitch a ride inside the gall. It'll eat some of the gall tissue, take advantage of the protection that it provides, but it generally does not harm the developing gall wasp larvae inside. A lot of these are wasps in the Cynipidae tribe, and these are actually gall wasps that have lost their ability to make a gall. But at the same time, we have a couple of moths, like this Florida oak gall moth here. This is a picture I got of one that ate the inside out of a stem gall, and the pupa was developing right here. We're not entirely sure if these moths leave the gall wasp larvae alone or actually eat them. We're still figuring that out, but for now, we don't think it really targets live galls. Probably the bigger threat, well, definitely the bigger threat to gall wasps are the parasitoids. Parasitoids refer to anything that not only is a parasite, but it specifically kills its host. Usually only takes one host, but it kills it in order to complete its own life cycle. Now, there are lots of parasitoid wasps out there, and I mean lots, but there's also tons that actually attack gall wasps. And so, believe it or not, the biggest threat to a gall wasp are other wasps. One of the most interesting is Euderus set, and I'll highlight that in a second. But take a look at this over here. This is one of our parasitoid gall wasps. You might think this is a stinger. This is actually part of the ovipositor. These wasps can't sting, plus they're only about the size of a small ant, or even smaller. But the ovipositor is folded up into this growth, and this is actually the ovipositor here. She is drilling her ovipositor into the gall where it finds the larvae of the gall wasp and either injects her egg right into that larvae or right next to it, depending on exactly what strategy she has. Very, very cool strategy, and it's a huge predation pressure on gall wasps. At the same time, there are regular predators, just things that will eat the larvae out of the gall, whether it's birds or small mammals. A lot of them will just chew right through it and get to that nice, tasty protein nugget inside. But some galls are harder to do that than others. And so something like this, where this is kind of a papery shell, it's a lot easier for those birds and mammals to get in. Finally, we are just learning about love vine. Of course, we've known about love vine forever. Not forever, but you know what I mean. But we're just now learning that these love vines, they're parasitic. So they'll attach to other plants and live off of those plants. They can actually attach themselves with these little suction cups onto live galls and suck the life out of those galls, taking all the nutrients and the water, and actually can kill the gall. And so it is a legitimate threat for a lot of the gall wasps out there. So far, mostly just for the smaller and the more papery, soft galls, but it's a very interesting relationship there. Now, let's talk a little bit more about a parasitoid wasp called Euderus set. It's named after the Egyptian god of death, Set. In this diagram, put together by Boulay. Here we have Euderus set, the parasitoid wasp, injecting an egg into the gall of Caloritis, no, of Basedia pallida. Got my species there wrong for a second. Basedia pallida is a stem-galling wasp, and you can see Euderus set injecting an egg into the gall wasp's kernel. Here, Basedia pallida has actually already hatched. This is Euderus set's larvae developing in the gall still. When the mother of Euderus set injected the egg, she also injected some mind-controlling hormones into the larvae of Basedia pallida. And so Basedia pallida now knows that it has to chew its way out of the gall, but it chews the hole just a little too small. The only thing that it can fit out of the hole is its head. Well, when Euderus set, still developing, decides it's time to leave the gall, it will actually chew its way through Basedia pallida, through its head, right out of the gall, and it just leaves an empty body and a head hole in the gall. And if that's not a brutal life cycle, I don't know what is. But what's even cooler, the team of researchers that figured out this life cycle for Euderus set continued to look at Basedia pallida, the gall wasp, and found that there were 9 other species of parasitoid wasps that actually attack Basedia pallida. The diversity of parasitoids there is just astounding to me, and it gives us an insight as to how big of a community these gall wasps may be supporting as hosts for other wasps and other insects. And I just think it's one of the coolest things out there. Definitely look it up. Definitely keep your eye out for more stories about parasitoid wasps in the news. This actually is starting to pick up because there's some new research that says there may be more wasps than beetles out there. And for any beetle people, that might be a bit of a shock. But these parasitoid wasps parasitize a lot of things. And so there might actually be more of those than beetles out there. All right, back to galls. Galls can actually provide some really valuable habitats to other insects, whether those insects actually interfere with the gall or not, or with the gall wasp or not. One of these that really loves a good wasp gall are ants. Whether the ants are getting sugary secretions off of the gall in exchange for protection from predators, or whether the ant is actually excavating out old galls and living inside there. Galls can be a huge source of good habitat for ant colonies that like to live in trees. I absolutely love this picture of these ants. Actually, this is a gall species called Caloritis quercus gemmaria. You can find this here in Florida, but it's not that common. These are the kernels that stick out of the tree that actually house the gall wasp larvae. And these kernels excrete a sugary substance that actually attracts the ants. And the ants will protect those kernels from any predators that might actually come along. And so it's a mutualistic relationship between the ants and the gall wasps. Even further, with this nectar that galls can provide to ants and other insects, studies have shown that the increased number of ants in the oak tree, if they're, let me start over. When a gall attracts these ants, those ants not only benefit the gall by keeping predators away from the gall, but the ant will actually also keep herbivores away from the tree itself. And so the trees can actually benefit from this relationship as well. And so it's a very, very interesting three-way mutualistic relationship between these species. Very, very cool. Okay, Now, what about humans? Gall, the word gall, means bitterness of spirit or rancor. Um, and this is actually because galls are full of a compound called tannic acid. There's many different kinds of tannic acids. We usually just call them tannins. Tannins are found in wine and coffee. They naturally occur in oak trees as an antifungal agent. But we as humans have known about the uses for tannic acids for a long time. We've been using them for dyes. You can see oak gall dyed yarn here. Tanning leather, making very primitive medicines because it's got an astringent quality. But most importantly, I think, is iron gall ink. We've been making ink with iron, with the galls and iron for almost 1,000 years now. We kind of stopped making it in the early 20th century, but you can definitely still find it in some stores. Now, to make iron gall ink, all you need are the tannic acids from your galls, some ferrous or iron sulfate, whichever you like to call it, which is actually a byproduct of iron ore mining. So it was available a long time ago, as soon as we were starting to really industrialize the iron ore mining process. And the biggest benefit of this ink is that it's permanent. This was one of the first permanent inks ever developed by humans. This meant that it was perfect for important documents, for writing down laws, for writing down history books, and for even, oh no, there it is, for writing down our Constitution and Declaration of Independence. That's right, everybody. Our Declaration of Independence and Constitution are both written in iron gall ink. So you can thank galls for helping us to make this wonderful permanent ink. It doesn't fade, it doesn't smudge, you can't wash it out with water, it's there to stay. And so it's absolutely perfect for important documents like this. What's even more fun is you can make your own iron gall ink. I did this over the summer and I developed what I think is my preferred recipe, and it's pretty easy. All you need to do is get your galls. About 40 grams is okay. That'll make a decent amount of ink. You want to crush them. A hammer works great. Put your galls in a bag. Whoever wants to do the crushing, just take it out to a sidewalk and hammer away. Get them to a nice small coarse powder. Then you want to add them with distilled water. Don't do tap water because there's some extra minerals in there. So you want to get distilled water to keep those minerals out. Cap it, put it in a glass jar, cap it, leave it outside in the shade for 3 days. This actually lets it ferment. That fermentation allows the tannic acid content to increase in the tea, as I like to call it at this stage, because you're basically making a tea. The tannic acid is important because it actually is the binder for the ink. That is what keeps it permanent. After 3 days, strain your crushed galls out of the mixture, keep the liquid or the tea, stir in your iron sulfate. It's very easy to get on Amazon and it's non-toxic. We actually use iron sulfate or ferrous sulfate to treat iron deficiency anemia. So you don't need to be scared of it just because it's got a scientific-y name. You'll see the color change instantly from a deep brown to a dark black as soon as you add the iron, because that's actually what adds what contributes the color to the ink. Finally, just thicken it up with some gum arabic. Gum arabic is found in a lot of foods. We've been using it for thousands of years. And it's just a dried tree sap from an acacia tree. And you can add a variable amount to that, depending on how thick you want your ink. You can use it for painting or writing or whatever. But you'll actually make a product that looks a lot like this. And so give it a try. It's super fun. It's super easy. But I warn you, you're making ink, so it will stain. So I do recommend wearing gloves and doing it outside. Here are 2 great examples of iron gall ink. This was a 1952 marriage certificate from Germany. Germany actually continued to use iron gall ink as its official government ink for printing until the 1980s. Unfortunately, though, over on the right, you see the disadvantage of iron gall ink. It's acidic. That tannic acid isn't neutralized in the ink making process. And so it actually does start to eat away at the paper eventually. So this is from the 1600s. It's had a long time to work at that paper, and it's definitely starting to eat away. So museum conservators don't always like iron gall ink, but you know, almost everything's been written in it so far. Even the Magna Carta was written in iron gall ink. And so we'll definitely be conserving those documents for a long time to come. But it just shows how permanent this ink is. You can still read the writing, if you know Italian, on that drawing. Okay, so let me wrap up. Just a little recap. Lots of different insects can make galls on plants. Lots of different types of plants too, so keep your eye out. The galls are a really important part of their communities. They play lots of different roles in their ecosystems. I think gall wasps are just super cool. They're diverse. They have complex life cycles. They support so many other different species. And finally, they support us. Humans love oak galls love humans. I would think if they would know how much we appreciate what they do. And so next time you're out on the trail and you see a gall, you know, just give it a little extra attention. Let them know that you appreciate what they're doing. Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody. I absolutely loved giving this talk. I would love to answer some questions, and I'll turn it over to Julia.
Wow, that was awesome, Christine. That was so wonderful. Thank you so much. We did have some really great questions. James, our extension specialist, did a good job answering some of them. Lots of great feedback, and someone didn't even know galls existed before today, so how fun is that? One question, are any of these galls edible?
That is a great question, actually. I can't think of any that I've heard about eating. I'm not going to say that they're going to kill you, but, but considering how much tannic acid is usually in a gall, it won't taste good at all. Tannic acid, like I said, is also the compound that kind of makes coffee and wine and tea bitter. Think of that times 100. And so I don't think it'd be a pleasant experience.
Gotcha, sounds good. Someone asked, that was so cool that you shared the recipe. Where can you buy galls and the iron sulfate? And I'll let you, yeah.
Let me go back to the recipe page in case anybody wants to screenshot it. You go for it. I found, you can find all kinds of recipes online, first of all. Some of them are very complicated. Some of them use white wine or vinegar or whatnot. You have to cook it or so on. I think this works just fine. It's very simple. I had a hard time finding galls this summer to make gall ink with. I was having to find enough to make with 20 or 30 kids at a time. And I had to go out and collect my own. I could not find them on Amazon for a price that I thought was adequate. So I would say wait until about November, December, and you'll probably start seeing them more on trees. And you can even find some on like urban oak trees, especially. I see a lot of the bullet type galls, the Dishelcaspis quercus firens, on urban just backyard trees. So check your backyard oak trees. Really any oak gall will do, not picky.
Okay, wonderful. And I will just add, not to collect any from Brooker Creek Preserve.
not in preserves, not state parks, not in preserves. That's why I was saying backyard trees are great.
Perfect. Someone said that they've seen a lot of summer galls, but not very many in the winter. Is one type more common than the other?
That's an awesome question. what's interesting is that most people who study galls know the winter galls more often because we prefer to do the studying in the winter outside, because no one wants to go outside in the middle of summer when it's hot. And so we actually don't know a lot of the summer generations for a lot of these species. And it's interesting that the commenter noticed that because I tend to see them more in the winter. Might be biased just on what I recognize as a gall. But there should be equal amounts for each season. The only caveat is that there are some galls that form on the roots of the tree. And we think that there are more root galls in the summer than in the winter, but I'm not sure as to why, actually. There's a lot of things we don't know yet. So that's a great question.
Wonderful. And a follow-up, would the cold or snow affect the galls?
Ah, another great question. There's actually a Instagram account for someone called the Fairy Gall Mother, and she will make jewelry out of galls. She's up in Colorado. There are gall species that can survive in the dead of winter in the coldest of places. As long as there's an oak tree, you can find a gall, no matter where in the world. You find galls down in Brazil, oak galls specifically. Down in Brazil, in Mexico there are a ton, Canada there's a ton, and so really it doesn't seem to be that temperature dependent. What seems to be a bigger factor is moisture. You will find more galls in dry habitats because they are a way for these wasps to escape the harsh conditions outside of the gall. They're protected in this nice enclosed area in the tree. And so they're much more common in dry areas. Great question.
Okay, wonderful. I think that is about it for the questions. I'm not seeing any more. If anyone has any more, type them in now. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. You've just got a ton of great feedback. Your
Awesome.
4-H friends said thank you as always, Christine.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Christine. It's always a pleasure to have you. That was a fascinating presentation. And thank you, participants, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I do just want to add that we are having a Florida Supernatures webinar series that will be every Wednesday for the rest of this month. We're exploring the wetlands of River Creek Preserve. So if that interests you at all, you can register through that. There's information on our Facebook page. And that's it. So thanks for joining us today, everyone. We appreciate your time and have a great weekend. Bye.